Hello, and welcome back to the CivilNet podcast. I'm here with my colleague, Eric Hacopian, because there was some very big news yesterday. Azerbaijan announced unilaterally that Armenia has agreed to the last two sticking points of a peace treaty, and that they are now able to move ahead to the next stage, whatever that may be. So, Eric, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
So what exactly is going on here? It sounds like they have the text agreed upon, but even a signing date doesn't seem to be in sight. What's this mean in real terms?
In real terms, if there actually is something that's going to be signed, it's going to be significant. But is that likely to happen? No. It's far more likely for nothing to be signed than for something to be signed. What is actually, if you look at the statements from their MFA and ours, what you really see is that there's the framework. There's what they've essentially announced, that they've agreed to the framework of what a peace treaty would look like, not necessarily what the peace treaty would be. So I think we need to step back from it. Then you have to look at it from a rational perspective. Aliyev will move heaven and earth not to sign anything. And if you look at the statements that came out of their MFA, it has all these conditionalities and all these poison pills. For example, the constitutional changes, which are not supposedly part of the peace agreement. These are all qualifiers for him not to sign. And what he wants to do is to come up for reasons and excuses not to ever sign a peace treaty for very rational reasons. The moment that he signs a peace treaty is the beginning of the end of his regime, because an Armenian enemy is to the Aliyev regime what air is to fire. It cannot exist without it. So minus incredible international pressure, we're putting an equivalent of a political gun to his head with consequences, i.e. if you don't do this, there's sanctions and other things, which I highly doubt. At the end of the day, I think that second formal part of this was the actual signing will actually never happen, or I would say is not very likely to happen.
And that's right, because they have said right from the start that this will not be signed until Armenia changes its constitution, which, if it ever passes, it requires a referendum with the participation of at least half the voters, and it needs to be approved by the people. And that could take years if they even pass it at all, because this, looks like Azerbaijan is holding this over our heads now, pass this constitution or else. So, what's going on there?
Well, according to the Armenian foreign minister today, that is not part, a constitutional change is not part of this quote unquote peace agreement. I think that is up to interpretation. I suspect that he's actually correct, but that really doesn't matter. That's the excuse that Aliyev will use not to sign. Mm-hmm. And because he understands perfectly well what a fantastic poison pill that demand is. Because he knows if he demands that, simply because he's demanding it, it will create political infighting inside of Armenia. And that because he is the one publicly demanding it would almost certainly guarantee its failure. And once that failure comes, he can turn around and tell the world, see, we wanted to sign a peace agreement, but the Armenians are a warlike people and they don't want peace, and that's why they wouldn't change their constitution to our demands. So this is the perfect poison pill. And it gives you the first glimpse of why it is not likely for something to be signed, again, unless there's intense pressure on him to do so.
And now another thing about this is we've seen over the past year them moving towards, and then eventually Pashinyan said we've got 15 out of 17 points. So we were approaching this step. However, I think everyone was surprised by just how quick something had happened. What's the urgency here? Where did this suddenness come from?
We can only speculate and go based on certain information that you get behind the scenes, confirmed, not confirmed. Aliyev's expectations of the Trump administration was that once Trump takes office, him and other people like him will get a carte blanche to do whatever they want, i.e. go back to sort of a U.S. that is not interested or doesn't care, and will give him or people like him the carte blanche to do what he wants. And everything about him is geared towards aggression toward Armenia. He is looking for any possible reason and excuse to attack Armenia. for countless reasons. One is because there's been a direct aggression to concession pipeline, so he wants to keep that going from the 2020 war to 22 to 23. Every time there's an aggression, it's paid off. So why should he stop? And secondly, the time gap in the imbalance of military forces that makes it not very costly to attack is diminishing over time. And this year is actually one of the key years. It's going to be much harder to attack Armenia moving forward after this year because of rearmament, reorganization of military, and other things. So he has a very short time gap in which this disparity still exists. So, but what is clear is that somehow, very likely, directly from the administration, he has gotten the message that that they're on board when they want to finalize this peace agreement, and they're putting pressure on him to
the Trump administration,
yes,
by the way, you're saying.
Yes, and very likely others, because if you look at the string of statements that have come out immediately from all European leaders, and even the Turkish foreign minister, the Turkish information ministry, even the vibes you're getting from Turkey are that they want this signed. So there's intense international pressure. And I think that intense international pressure led to this statement yesterday that is saying yes without actually saying yes or giving him leeway. So he says, if you want me to sign, yes, I'm on board with signing, but I'll have these 3 or 4 provisos that would make it go away. But obviously what's very clear is that the Trump world that he expected for impunity has been proven not to be the case, and very likely the opposite is the case. And he's been forced to say something that he normally would not have said, which is their willingness to sign. Now, why is this relevant? Is because if you're on record, even with their shitty statement yesterday saying that they're willing to sign, it makes any aggressions later on now or over the next few months, much, much harder. If you're saying that they're declaring that they've agreed to something. So that's actually a good thing on its own. That's probably the only good thing that frankly came out of yesterday is the fact that if they make that statement, it makes even an attack, which is under no circumstances justifiable, even less justifiable, even from a practical political perspective. So I think it most likely is that there's intense international pressure on him to sign this, even from some of his friends.
Well, the true absurdity of all of this is that just a day or two before that big announcement, the Defense Ministry of Azerbaijan's official, I'd say, outlet Caliber, which is just a fire-breathing anti-Armenian hatred, constantly said that, we've discovered that Armenia is planning to attack in April. And so they went from Armenia is going to attack us to the very next day, we're at a peace treaty. Was that them, again, putting more pressure on Armenia, trying to make a deadline of April? But then, these two things don't add up. What's going on?
Well, the two things that add up is what their desires are and what the international pressure is. Listen, he will look for any excuse to start an invasion or attack on Armenia. On different forms, it does not need to be a massive invasion. It could be a minor incursion. It could be attacking military bases when he's talking about, I'm not going to let you rearm. So, and think of him as a teenager with this, new car. And he's got all of this thing. The only thing he's ever been successful in doing is building a semi-competent military. And now you're telling him he can't use it. And he knows that if he doesn't use it now, it becomes redundant a year and a half, 2 years from now, or 6 months from now. And what's the point of it?
In the past year, we've seen constant flights from Israel.
Constant
we
rearming.
know that's been rearmament
Yes.
for the Azerbaijani side.
So what overlays all of these conversations is this consistent desire by Aliyev to start a war for his own domestic political purposes. But he needs to balance that out with foreign considerations and what the consequences of that would be. So he is not very happy with the fact that people are pushing him to sign something that he doesn't want to sign. While on our side, there's this intense pressure not to do everything possible, not to have an excuse for the other side to attack. where you get this constant stream of self-humiliation and peace rhetoric to make that politically untenable for the other side. This last bit is really what overlays all of this. We need to understand that. Everything else is an underplay of that. It's the Armenian side that's playing for time, and the other side that knows the time is running out.
And so another important thing to think about is, okay, let's say hypothetically this even does get signed. How binding would it even be? Like, for example, I mean, it gets the concessions now and then it says, okay, peace. And then it makes that excuse a year down the line and invades. And then, you know, what happens
I
then?
think an international treaty is a very high bar. If it was a low bar, he would have signed already. If you could have violated it very easily, he would have signed it in 2020, along with the corridor through Sunik with the Russian guards. Okay, he didn't, because he understands for a small country, breaking an international treaty is a bridge that most small countries cannot get away with. In fact, if you look at the history of signed peace agreements, they're actually they hold fairly well over time, just because of the repercussions of breaking a treaty are far greater than anything below that. So if the treaty itself was meaningless, he would have signed it a long time ago. The reason he's not signing is because he understands it's not meaningless from a diplomatic perspective. So people who say that a signed peace treaty doesn't mean anything, it actually means a lot, in the sense that breaking it will come with political consequences. Now, it might be consequences he's willing to pay. But historically, if you look at it holistically, even, for example, the peace between Egypt and Israel, Israelis have not done anything to break that peace with Egypt. There's countless reasons for it, but breaking an international treaty is a very high bar that few countries, especially small, semi-relevant ones, can get away with.
Well, now, something that's unique about this agreement that a lot of other past agreements don't have is that there are no mediators, no guarantors, no anything. And that just speaks to the issue of trust. There is no trust, nor there are even platforms for building trust. I mean, the few Azerbaijanis that were attending these little peace summits and forums with their fellow Armenians are now in jail for treason. So how do we even deal with a partner for peace when they are completely just, off the wall?
There is no partner for peace. All of this is essentially a freezing of a conflict. There's no peace, there's no reconciliation, there's no justice. So this is essentially freezing this in time for something to revive again in 10, 15 years. So no, then there's not going to be any of those things, and you cannot have it with a regime whose survival depends on not having it. So trust an international treaty on its own, it has weight, it has political weight. Mediators, no mediators, it doesn't matter. But if we're talking about true peace, then this is the farthest thing from it.
Definitely not. It's just good PR to say, oh, look, we're going towards a peace treaty. And we all know that that's just not possible. Now, out of these two sticking points, one of them has been about the EU monitors. Will they go? That's a whole question that we just don't know the answer to yet. But the other one was about the international cases we have before the ICJ, could have before the ICC, International Criminal Court, though that has not been filed, I think, in deference to Azerbaijan. And with the lead representative, Eric Hacopian's resignation last week, we knew something like this could be coming. And so now, where does this leave us in the pursuit of justice if we are just completely abdicating ourselves at the international courts?
Well, let's deal with the first one. If you look at the text, it says third-party forces. EU monitors are not forces. So I would highly doubt that this covers removing the EU monitors. It's about because they're clearly not a force.
But why was it such a sticking point then?
Well, it was a sticking point for the Azeri side because that was they want them gone so they can do aggressions.
Yeah, but if you're saying
but
that
after you're signing, it's ideological in that sense. But it's very clear that if you're talking about forces, monitors are not forces. So from the Armenian perspective, this does not mean the EU monitors go. Even from a rational perspective, if you look at the text, that's not what it means because they're not armed. So they're not forces. Forces by definition are armed. So that's the first thing. On the lawsuits, that is by far the most painful and humiliating part of this, to be honest with you. And no, I want to be careful in saying this, but literally no country that has respect for itself or has any honor would ever give that up. And we obviously don't at this point. Because what are you giving up? You're giving up essentially, let's look at a 22 case. Let's forget about Artsakh for now. That you're giving up a case in which our POWs were executed, that women POWs were raped, tortured, have their fingers cut off, put in their mouths, and their eyes gouged out. And we're saying that we're willing not to pursue justice on that. It doesn't say much about us as a country, as a leadership, or as a people that are willing to do that, because almost nobody else would. So that is by far the most humiliating and painful part of this, because what you're saying is everything that has happened since 2020 till now, every crime, every child murdered in Artsakh, every prisoner tortured and murdered, heads cut off, that we're okay with all of that. That's what you're really saying. And we will hang our heads in shame for generations because of this decision.
I was speaking for a CivilNet interview with Eric Hacopian, which you can also watch over on our YouTube page or our site. And he was saying just that you cannot have peace without justice, and that there are past examples where groups at least suspended, not withdrew. Even if you suspend temporarily or give a bit of a break to say, all right, yeah, let's see how this goes, but to just completely withdraw. I mean, he says the government doesn't know the power of what those cases stand for and don't seem to be interested in it. And that is completely on us. And that is a true shame. Let's say this treaty does get signed. Against all odds, Azerbaijan is forced to put his signature down. Aliyev signs it. Given what we know, what's in the treaty, and a lot of it we don't know what it says, the IC opposition groups are asking, release the text now. What does it say? What does this mean based on what we know is in there?
It's the local version of the Versailles Treaty with the ethnic cleansing, but without the reparations. This will not bring peace because it will not bring justice. The moment Armenia signs this, you're signing, essentially giving our official approval to the Second Armenian Genocide, in so many words. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and make that charge, but at the same time, if the leadership of this country thinks that that will prevent a war that is more dangerous to the country, and it means no war when we cannot afford to be in a war, both technically and capacity-wise, at least not today, then it's a very hard choice that they might have to make. So it's not as simple as to cast blame on them. But let's just clearly understand what this is. This treaty essentially says no right of return and that everything that's happened in Artsakh is acceptable. And everything that's happened since then, the 22 invasion, are acceptable. And for example, it would not have an immediate withdrawal from Armenian territory. That would need to be through decommissions, which will never happen. We know it will never happen. So this is the interesting part of this. This is the Azeri dream. It's complete humiliation for the Armenian side and a complete victory in the sense that it buries the Artsakh issue on Artsakh seas forever, or attempts to, while they're still not willing to sign. Because at the end of the day, what matters is not what's good for their country. And this conflict has always been about regime survival. So Aliyev is willing to forego what is the best possible scenario for his country simply for his own personal interest. That tells you all you need to know. But overall, this will not bring peace because 15 or 20 years from now, there'll be other Armenian leadership that will revisit this issue, especially when Azerbaijan is a country with an expiration date. Anybody who thinks this level of injustice codifying into a treaty will bring peace really doesn't know anything about history.
That's it. You can't bring peace by the barrel of a gun. That's just not how it works.
You actually can if you're Russia and the other party is Finland. But that's not what we have here. And there's going to be a change in the juxtaposition of capacities between these two countries. And the moment if this agreement is ever signed by this government, they will become the Armenian Weimar government. And everything that comes after that is going to be nationalist, militarist, ever more so right-wing, and ever more so intent on reversing the humiliation of the country. That's just the way history works. And not to understand that, which is, by the way, something we didn't understand in 94. And it's going to be the same thing in reverse. And I'm afraid it's going to have the same results 15 or 20 years from now.
Well, that's a sobering thought to end on, but we are in some very sober times. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
And thank you for joining the CivilNet podcast.